What did Frédéric Vasseur have to do with Fiorano's data to be completely shocked? In the case of a driver like Lewis Hamilton at the wheel of the SF-26, are we simply facing a good test session? Or facing the first sign of something that could change the internal balance of Ferrari? Because what happened in that test does not fit with what Ferrari expected to see. Not because of the context, not because of the car, and above all, not because of the moment of the season. And yet, the numbers are there, and they have provoked a reaction that within the team they already describe as totally unexpected. What happened in Fiorano cannot be understood as a simple day of testing, and that is the first key point that must be made clear. Ferrari was not looking for spectacle nor headlines, much less a display of pure pace. The objective was much more technical, much more specific. To work together with Pirelli in the development of rain tires for the new 2026 regulations. A cold, controlled context without media pressure. The perfect scenario where extraordinary things normally do not happen. But this time they did pass. Lewis Hamilton took to the track with the SF-26 in artificially wet conditions, completing an extremely demanding program that saw him lap more than 140 laps in a single day. This, translated into real terms, means accumulating more than 400 kilometers of constant data, without room for errors, without long pauses, without room for improvisations. And this is where the magnitude of what Ferrari saw begins to build. Because it wasn't just about rolling, it was about understanding how the car reacted in each phase, in each corner, in each grip transition. From the get-go, engineers began to notice something different in the way Hamilton interacted with the car. He wasn't overly aggressive, he wasn't forcing unnecessary situations, but he wasn't being conservative either. There was an extremely fine balance between control and performance. And that, in rainy conditions, is one of the most difficult aspects to achieve even for the best drivers in the world. Because here you don't just compete against others. You compete against the track, against the temperature, against the invisible wear of the tire. As the rounds progressed, the data began to show a consistency that broke with any internal forecast. Lap after lap, Hamilton not only maintained the pace, but stabilized it in an extremely narrow window. This means that tire degradation was not affecting its performance in a chaotic manner, as is often the case in these conditions, but was being managed with almost surgical precision. And that is where Ferrari begins to understand that they are not seeing something normal. Because the SF-26 at this stage is not a finished car. It's an evolving concept, a platform that's still being shaped. And when a driver manages to extract that level of consistency from a car like this, the message is very clear. He is not only adapting to the car, he is raising his base performance. It's pushing the boundaries of what the car can do at this point in development. And while all this was happening on the track, on the wall, and in the garage, another equally important process began: real-time analysis. Every turn, every sector, every micro-correction in the steering wheel was being recorded, compared, and projected. And what the engineers began to see in the telemetry was what ended up generating that chain reaction within the team. Because there were no irregular spikes, no abrupt drops in performance, no signs of fatigue in the tire management. Everything fit. Everything made sense. That is the true starting point of this story. Not Vasseur's reaction yet. It is the exact moment in which Ferrari realizes that the data they are seeing does not match what they expected to find. And when that happens in Formula One, when reality surpasses the theoretical model, that's when things really start to change. This is where the story takes a much deeper turn, because once Ferrari finishes collecting all the track data, the real analysis begins. And it is at that moment when Frédéric Vasseur's reaction stops being a simple surprise and becomes something much more serious within the team. Because we are not talking about sensations, nor impressions from the pit wall. We are talking about complete telemetry crossed with a simulator, compared with previous internal references, and validated lap after lap. And when all that information was put on the table, what appeared was something that Ferrari had been chasing for years without success. An almost perfect correlation between what they expected to see and what was actually happening on the track. This point is absolutely critical to understanding Vasseur's reaction. During previous seasons, Ferrari had suffered precisely because of this. The car could seem competitive in simulations, but then in the race or in variable conditions, the reality was completely different. There was a structural disconnect between factory and track. And in Fiorano, for the first time in a long time, that gap practically disappears. But the most shocking thing is not only that the car works as it should, but who is behind the wheel when that happens. Because Hamilton doesn't just run the program, he optimizes it. It begins to generate constant feedback with engineers that allows parameters to be adjusted in real time, fine-tuning the behavior of the SF-26 in a much wider operational window than expected. And this is where Vasseur understands that this is not an isolated case. Because when a driver manages to extend the operating window of a car in rainy conditions, where everything is more unstable, more unpredictable, it means that he is contributing something that goes beyond pure driving. It is directly influencing the development of the car. In fact, one of the aspects that caught the most attention in the internal analysis was how Hamilton managed to maintain performance even when the tire entered critical phases of degradation. Normally, in these situations, the lap time drops irregularly, peaks, errors, and traction losses appear. But not in this case. What is observed is a controlled, progressive, almost anticipated performance curve. And that, inside the garage, begins to generate a very clear feeling. This is not normal. It is at this point that Vasseur's reaction becomes truly significant. Because he doesn't react to lap times, he reacts to what those times represent. To consistency. To the ability to repeat. To Hamilton's reading of the car and the track. And above all, what that implies for the immediate future of the team. Because if the SF-26 is able to behave like this at such an early stage of development, and also with a driver who is starting to mold it to his style, then Ferrari has not only improved. Ferrari could have solved one of its biggest structural problems without anyone really being aware until now. And that's where everything changes. Because it is no longer just a good test, nor a good sign. This is a possible internal transformation. One that Vasseur did not expect to see so soon, and that now forces him to rethink many things within the team. And this is where everything explodes internally within Ferrari, because when you put together performance, consistency, perfect correlation, and a driver capable of amplifying all that, you are no longer talking about a specific improvement. You are talking about a possible change of hierarchy and direction within the team. Because what begins to be projected after Fiorano is not only what Hamilton did, but what he can cause. And that's what really hits Vasseur. It is not the present, it is the domino effect that this can generate in the development of the SF-26 and in the internal dynamics of Ferrari throughout the 2026 season. Until now, Ferrari came from a very clear structure with established references, with a more or less defined internal balance in terms of performance and technical leadership on the track. But what these data show breaks that stability. Because when a driver not only matches internal benchmarks, but begins to exceed them in critical conditions, it forces the entire team to rethink their reference points. And that, in Formula One, is huge. Inside the garage, this translates into something very concrete. A change of focus. Engineers are no longer working solely on a theoretical basis or on previous data. They are starting to work on what Hamilton is showing is possible to do with the car. And that accelerates processes, changes priorities, and redefines the development path. Because now they know that the limit of SF-26 is not where they thought it was. But there is something even deeper in all this. And it is the internal perception. Because in a team like Ferrari, where every detail counts and every comparison weighs, seeing this type of performance generates a direct impact at all levels. It's not just respect. It's recognition that something is changing. That Hamilton is not simply adapting to the team, but is beginning to influence its competitive DNA. And that's where Vasseur's reaction makes complete sense. Because he understands perfectly what this means. Understand that if this trend continues, Ferrari will not only have found performance, it will have found direction. A clear direction based on real data, validated sensations, and a pilot capable of executing under any conditions. Furthermore, there is a factor that cannot be ignored, the context of 2026. With new regulations, with more sensitive tires, with more complex cars to manage, having a driver who masters precisely the most unpredictable conditions becomes a brutal strategic advantage. And that is what Fiorano has hinted at. Therefore, what began as an apparently routine test ends up becoming a very powerful internal signal. One of those that are not announced publicly, but that changes everything within the team. Because now Ferrari knows something it only suspected before, that it has in its hands a combination capable of going much further than expected. And the real question that remains in the air is inevitable. If this is what Hamilton can do in a test, in controlled conditions and with a car under development, what can happen when everything is optimized, when the races come, and when he really has to fight for something big? And in the end, it all comes down to an idea that is already beginning to gain strength within Ferrari, although it has not yet been said publicly. What happened at Fiorano was not a coincidence. It was a sign. A sign that the SF-26 has greater potential than the team itself had projected. A sign that historical correlation problems could finally be under control. And above all, a sign that Lewis Hamilton has not come to Ferrari simply to compete, but to transform the way the team understands its own performance. Vasseur's reaction is not born of enthusiasm, it is born of recognition. of the exact moment when a team leader realizes that he has something different on his hands. Something that not only improves the present, but redefines the path to the future. Because when the data speaks with this clarity, there is no longer room for doubts, only for decisions. And Ferrari now has to take a very important one. Because what they have seen in Fiorano forces them to rethink their references, their expectations, and possibly also their leadership on the track. It is no longer about developing a competitive car. It is about building a project around a reality that has been exposed in these data, that the ceiling of SF-26 is higher than they imagined, and that Hamilton may be the key to reaching it. So the conclusion is as simple as it is forceful. Ferrari has found something. Something I didn't expect to find so soon. And the most disturbing thing for its rivals is that this has only just begun. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.